Freddie Villano of Bass Gear Magazine here with Andy Curran of Coney Hatch. Andy has a new band called Envy of None, featuring Maya Wynn on vocals and Alex Lifeson of Rush on guitar. And Andy was kind enough to join us to talk about this new project, among other things. So Andy, tell us a little bit about Envy of None and the origins of this new band that you have with Alex Lifeson and Maya Wynn.
In the early 2000s, I kind of stepped away from the stage and recording and doing music, and I worked with Anthem Records as their A&R guy, and also their management company SRO. So we worked, we basically handled Rush and Tea Party and Big Wreck and Stephen Page and a couple other acts. So I really wasn't performing live a lot, but I had studio stuff going on all the time. But I was asked as the A&R guy to judge an online talent contest. And Maya Wynn was one of the contestants that made it to the top 10. And then as a prize, a lot of these contestants got some recording time and gear and money and a mentoring call from someone in the music industry. And that just happened to be me. And so I did a call with Maya, and halfway through the call, like I was giving her advice basically as a young songwriter. She was 21 years old at the time. Halfway through the call, Freddie, she said to me, Andy, I looked you up on the internet. What do you think about you and I co-writing? I was not expecting that. I was like, okay, this call just kind of went in a different direction. And so we started exchanging ideas, and that was when Alf Annabellini, who's also part of Envy of None, and we started coddling together these ideas, which were very different from anything that I had stylistically done. A lot more electronic, a little bit industrial, ambient, nothing like the hard rock sort of alternative stuff that I'm known for. And I ended up telling Alex about Maya. I said, man, you will not believe this lead vocalist that I've stumbled upon. And he said, send it to me. I'd like to hear it. And we had been sort of, our friendship goes right back to 1982 when we were label mates on Anthem Records for Alex and I. But he recently had asked me to play bass on a couple of tracks that he was recording, and he had just done some guide bass on it. And I jokingly said, well, don't you know any other bass players? I thought you got a guy on speed dial, like his initials are GL. And he said, no, Andy, you got to do this. So I ended up playing some bass on it. And he said, if ever I can return the favor and play guitar on something, please let me know. Oh. So fast forward, we've got this Maya Wynn situation working on ideas with us. And so I sent a couple songs over to Alex. He fell in love with her voice and said, man, this is so cool. We got to keep going. So at that, like, it was very unconventional because we put together the project almost together as just a writing exercise. Everybody was working virtually during the pandemic, and there was no talk about shopping a record deal or putting a band together and going on the road. It was very much a musical collaboration project, and that was the spirit of it, Freddie.
Yeah, it comes across. I was going to ask you about the collaboration process, but you've answered that in that it was remote. One of the things that I really like about the Envy of None music is that some of it even borders a bit on, it's like a broad palette. Like there's a bit of avant-garde-ism to it where, something like I was writing down the song "Look Inside." I really like your bass tone on that, and just it almost sounds experimental in a way. I don't know if that was part of the objective of it. It doesn't. It sort of defies, fitting neatly into a particular musical category.
I'm happy to hear you say that, and I would agree with you. Yeah. And experimental is interesting because it really was. And I'll tell you about the process. I'll get a little bit deeper on this. So you mentioned Look Inside. Perfect example of that was yours truly goes into his studio one night with a nice topping up of red wine. I put the glass down. I plugged in the Rickenbacker 4003. I found a groove on my home computer, and I just started messing around with this really sort of trippy, stonery rubbery bass line and distorted it and put it in stereo and sent it off. And it was just me really, as you said, experimenting and just like pushing the boundaries. And I thought, well, the tempo is really sludgy. It's in 3/4. I wonder if everybody will like it. So I sent it off and everybody went, wow, this is really cool. It's like very different, almost Pink Floyd-ish, we call it our stoner lullaby. And that was really the whole ride all the way through. It was like, you think about a song on the record called Dumb, and that almost is like a straight up Euro techno track that you could probably hear in some disco thing, and everybody was like, okay, this is that couldn't be any different than Look Inside. So you're right, there's quite a landscape of different styles, and I guess really the bar was set. If you like this, let's work on it. And we would send dozens of ideas around and the cream rise to the top. And if everybody unanimously said, well, I like Look Inside, let's work on that, then that would be our focus for the next month. Yeah, so we really were experimenting through it. And there was no label either or management going, oh, no, you can't put that on. Or a producer sitting behind your back going, Andy, don't play that. That's you sound stoned, whatever.
Well, it's interesting, because I think, the being unshackled from a label has a certain amount of freedom to it, I would say. And then on top of that, I don't really know Maya or anybody else that was involved, but you and Alex didn't even seem shackled by your past, musically speaking, which a lot of people can get caught in that trap of, regurgitating or, trying to stay within the framework of a style that made them famous. But that didn't seem to be a problem for you.
No, it wasn't. And I think it's worth me telling you that Maya Wynn, our lead vocalist, her roots are firmly planted in sort of what I would call Americana folk. So she definitely stepped outside of her, I guess, comfort zone, maybe. I mean, even though we were all very comfortable doing it. I think as musicians, all four of us enjoyed pushing the envelope, much to the chagrin of music fans. I'm guilty of it too. If I love somebody and then they release an album and you're like, what is this? This is nothing. But this is a new project. It's not Rush. It's not Coney Hatch. Alex specifically wrote his guitar parts with thinking this was not Rush. There are moments when he flexes his muscle and you can go, that's undeniable Alex Lifeson. But the two of us, it was quite liberating and very rewarding to step outside those shackles, as you put them, and I have a nickname here in Canada as the Earl of Eighth Notes. You think I play a lot of eighth notes, just plowing through, maybe too many years of listening to AC/DC. So there are moments on the record where I go back to my old eighth notes, but I tried to really vary it. And that included not playing electric bass on every track. I played a lot of Moog style, keyboard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because there's a lot of synth sounding bass stuff.
Yeah. So, well, if you want to segue into that, I'll tell you about that because it was part and parcel of, as a musician, you probably know this, when you sit down, sometimes you plug a different guitar in or a different bass and you're trying to get a tone. And if it wasn't feeling right with an electric bass, I would go, okay, I'm going to try keyboard bass on this, and see if that takes me somewhere else. That ride of the keyboard bass dates right back to 1985 when Coney Hatch was doing their last album with Max Norman. And Max had worked with Ozzy Osbourne and a bunch of really great bands. And he was asking me about my bass tone. And we were talking about Michael Anthony and even Def Leppard and a few of those bands that were doubling the bass part with a big fat analog, Moog type or keyboard bass, right?
Sure.
And so I went out and bought myself a Moog Source, and it was a monophonic, and we nicknamed it Fat Boy. And I would double some of my bass lines, especially eighth notes. It's really easy just to go dan 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 all the way along, right? So I started building up a couple of old analog keyboards. Then I got introduced to the guys at IK Multimedia, started working with them a lot with their sample tanks and sample mode, and same with Arturia. Those guys make some amazing old retro keyboard sounds, and I kind of love that. I was a big fan of Depeche Mode and even Devo, and bands like that would have these bass synth lines. And maybe my favorite might be either Edgar Winter or the Bee Gees. If you listen to some of the Bee Gees bass lines that are played on keyboards, or what Edgar Winter, I was like, oh man, that's an amazing sound. And we all get bored as musicians. So I kind of like, I'm not going to play electric bass on this. I know I'm just going to sit them aside and I'm going to play some Fat Boy bass.
Yeah, well, it opens our mind up to other realms of our creativity, probably, so. Although I will say, I got some pictures of, you have some pretty nice basses that you probably, I wonder, which ones you may have used.
Yeah.
I see there's a, let's see. Well, you mentioned the 4003 Rickenbacker, was it?
Yeah, and I had a 4001 back in the day in Coney Hatch, and I sold it begrudgingly because I thought, like many years later, at the time, I thought this doesn't have enough bottom on it, and not knowing that it's just a brush of the stroke of the paintbrush. But I had a Ruby Burst 4001, which are super rare, and I sold it to one of the guys in our road crew for $400, and I regret the day that I did that. So I had to replace it, and I got the 4003, which is the bass I used on Look Inside, and that has a very distinct tone, I think.
Yeah, there's another bass. It's like a Fender Telecaster looking bass here.
Oh yeah, okay.
But yeah, the note is that it's a Lucin G bass.
Yeah, a Lucin bass. So there is a luthier here in Canada. He's made some wonderful acoustic guitars for Zach Wilde and Alex Lifeson and a few other really great players. And he asked me if I wanted a bass, an acoustic bass. And I said, man, that's gonna, like, thank you for the offer, but that's a total waste of time. Like I'll just play it, out by a fire pit with some of my buddies. I won't use it on stage. No one's going to see it. And he said, well, why don't we do an electric bass? So, and I had this wood from this iconic music venue called the El Macombo that was given to me by the CEO. And so we used that on the veneer. But when Garen at Lucin said to me, well, what kind of bass do you want? What kind of bass should we make? I said, well, I really like the early slabs, the Fender slabs, like the 59, that Tom Hamilton would play, or Sting, with the Telecaster type of a headstock.
Yeah.
So funny story about this, and very true. I called my friends up at Fender. I have a very good relationship with them over the years of working with Geddy Lee. And I said, can you send me the schematics of a slab bass, because I'm going to build one. And they were like, absolutely not. We are not sending that to you. And I was like, oh, okay. So I told Geddy Lee about the story, and he was like, well, come to my house, bring some the measuring things, and I've got 2 slabs, measure them. So we measured up Geddy's slab. We built the bass. It's swamp ash with a veneer of the El Macombo wood on the top. And then the guys at Fender were kind enough to send me, is it Mike Dirntz, the guy from, I'm trying to think. He's from Green Day, the bass player. So they sent me one of his necks, and we Frankensteined it together, and I ended up using that on it. And it's a single coil pickup made by MJS pickups. They make a lot of bass pickups or pickups for Rick Emmett in Canada from Triumph. But that's a fun bass to play. Not very comfortable, I will say. No contoured body. It is a slab.
Wow. Yeah. And then, well, let me ask you about the one final one that really caught my eye, because I'm a big fan, and I have I don't have a Mockingbird, but I have a BC Rich Eagle, but I see you have a BC Rich Mockingbird. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you about the Mockingbird. I want to give a shout out to a couple other basses before the Mockingbird. I played a Dan Electro shorthorn on a couple songs, because I really they have a distinct tone, and I fell in love with that bass
cosmetically when I would see photographs of Golden Earring, and I just thought, what a cool looking bass. So and quite versatile. Even though I don't have an original Dan Electrode, the new ones are with that lipstick pickup. They sound really cool, right? Played some 8-string on it. A company in Canada called Lado made me an 8-string, and I played that on old strings along with some synthesizer bass. But the Mockingbird, Freddie, dates right back to 1982, when I first went out on the road on this with Coney Hatch, and we opened up for Judas Priest on the Screaming for Vengeance tour.
Wow.
And my two main basses was a short scale BC Rich Mockingbird, which is the photo that you saw, and I had a long scale version of it too. And I used those for years, and I probably got sucked in because I saw pictures of Rick Derringer and Joe Perry using them, and I was like, oh my God, I love the way those basses look. So subsequently sold the long scale, but the short scale feels like a guitar, and it's so comfortable to play. And I ended up using that on Lyre.
Okay.
And so
That
Lyre
makes
is
sense.
super fuzzy. There's actually a distortion built into the Mockingbird with a little toggle switch, right? And so you can growl it out there without even having a pedal and chain.
Yeah, a friend of mine that did a little bit of work on my Eagle called called that switch the amp killer switch. Like there's a boost on that bass that just will, like, if you're not careful with the volume.
I would agree with you. I've got many a stern warning from a sound man playing the live gig, but that seemed like a perfect bass to use on the song Liar, which is all, again, stereo distorted basses. I mean, I'm like, if guitar players can double or triple their tracks, why can't basses? So I went for it. There's probably 4 or 5 songs on the NB&N record, which my bass is doubled left and right and kind of panned.
Are you, when you do that kind of doubling, are you just doing multiple tracks like in one performance, or are you playing it over individually each time?
Usually what I do, Freddie, is I'll lay the main bass track down from top to tail, and then I'll pan it to the left, and then I'll just double it like a double guitar part, and I'll play it all the way through. But it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in Dumb, we decided that maybe it didn't need to be doubled all the way through. So actually, the double bass only happens in the choruses. So it goes mono and then opens up, and it really, much to the chagrin of guitar players, we go in and I'll use a Canadian term, and we puck hog that whole frequency, right?
Yeah. For the songs that had bass on them, did you dial in, like, did you have like a go-to sound and then you modified it per song, or did you treat each song differently?
Each song differently, but my go-to, I have to say, the consistent go-to gear on all of this was the Doug Pinnick Tech 21 pedal. And it's quite versatile because you can make it, very nasty and gnarly, or you can really dial it back, So there were times, like, as I mentioned, I used the Hofner Beetle bass on a couple of tracks, and there was no way that you could hype up that sound. I wanted it to be warm, so I dialed it all back, right? And the distortion or the overdrive level of that pedal, I just fell in love with it. And it was such I don't know, it became part of my toolbox. Like I can't live without that pedal now. If somebody takes it away from me, it'll be a tough one. But yeah, like, and I think to keep the sound, the bass tones fresh, instead of swapping out the actual rig, I was swapping out basses. So I honestly used probably at least 6 or 7 different basses throughout this record.
Yeah, I like doing that. It's interesting. Sometimes if I'm doing work for somebody, I'll try to be consistent. But if I'm doing my own thing, then I break out the color chart.
I would agree. I would agree with you, because there's 3 tracks on the record that Alex Lifeson wrote, with that being Kabul Blues, Spy House, and Western Sunset. So I wanted to be very careful with him on those. I'm like,
you think about the guy who he's been working with through his entire career. So there was part of my mind that went, don't even try, Curran, to go head to head with Geddy Lee or play. So I purposely underplayed, but tonally I played it very safe. I used my P basses, very warm. I broke out my fretless bass. I've got a Jacko relict
Yeah, I
jazz
saw that.
bass.
Yep, that was
And
one of the pictures I got too.
yeah, so that was nice to finally play some fretless bass on a record. I'd never done that, and ironically, Geddy Lee gave that to me as a present.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, okay, well, this is kind of cool. I'm playing on Alex's track, but using the bass that Geddy gave me. But I did play it much safer, and I'm with you on that. With your own material, you can take some chances.
Yeah.
But I was like, this is Alex's baby. I'm not going to blow it up and send him, some caveman distorted bass.
Yeah, it's funny, sometimes I feel like you really, even though people have a reputation for, based on their history in music, being craftsmen and whatnot, sometimes an idea, if it's not fully fleshed out, they don't see the whole picture. You got to kind of spell it out for them. So, using a bunch of different effects or something like that, if it's not really well charted or explained, they could come off in a way that's off-putting. So I figure it's better to usually just keep it meat and potatoes. And then
I agree with you. And on effects, you brought it up. I would say really the only effect that I used on my bass, which is a favorite of mine, and I try to be subtle with it, is chorus. I've got a couple different chorus pedals. I've got a TC and I've got the old Boss chorus, and I do like them in smooth, especially on a whole tone when you're playing those nice notes and you can smooth it out. But
Look Inside sounds like it has chorus on it.
I think it does have a little bit on there. It might be a little layering of it, but the one other thing that I think might be worth mentioning, even though I was playing it safe on the track Kabul Blues, that was written in C. So I dropped down to a low C on my 4-string. I don't have any 5-string basses. I don't know. I just never really liked the idea of 5-string. I always felt comfortable on 4. So I ended up getting hip shots and just dropping them down to D or C. And as long as you play those, not too aggressively, they'll stay in tune. So on Kabul Blues, I thought, okay, what would Tony Levin do here? And I tried to channel Tony Levin with almost like a stick vibe, but tuned down to a low C on that track.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it sounds great. Your bass tones really are great and clear. The music allows a lot of room. It gives it a lot of air and space to breathe. So you can really hear, your performances are articulate, and you can, the bass is, a factor in these songs. It's not just like a supportive role. Although I will say there is, if you listen to Cliff Williams and Coney Hatch, there is an art to playing eighth notes, so.
There is, and thank you for saying that. I do believe sonically, because it's so soundscapey, and Alex's guitar tones were sculpted to be more of less traditional guitar. There's a lot of room for the bass to speak.
A lot of atmosphere in the guitars. Yeah.
But it's funny you mentioned, Cliff, because when I met Kim Mitchell, who was the lead guitar player and founder of Max Webster, he produced the first Coney Hatch record, and he said to me, Andy, you've got balls the size of Montreal, man, when you play bass. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he goes, the way that you'll just hang on that eighth note, and you'll just milk it till the cows come home and not deviate from it. And I was like, yeah, because it's like, it's driving. There's no need to get fancy when you're doing 4 on the floor cock rock like Coney Hatch was doing. The last thing I should be doing is try to be playing like like Geddy or Billy Sheehan or people like that, right? But I do, I love early James Gang, and I love Tim Bogert, and if I need to stretch, I'll stretch, but I really try to pick my moments.
Yeah, I mean, I my philosophy about that has always been derived mostly from the audience. If the audience is, bopping their heads or dancing and having a good time, it's like, why do I want to disrupt that groove for my own benefit?
And you know, Freddie, it's interesting you say that too, because we with the Envy of None record, and specifically Alex Lifeson and myself, we were like, serve the song first. This is not about look at me, listen to me. Although, you know, I could argue that the look inside bass thing is kind of like look at me, but it's not show offy like I'm playing a million notes. But you got to serve the song first, and the rhythm section, and those have been a foundation for me. Lock in with the drummer, serve the song, then everything else is icing.
Yeah, I agree with that philosophy or bass approach 100%.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I mean, as much as I admire guys like the ones that you've mentioned, you know, I've always gravitated towards songs more than I have individual musicians or performances. And so I think that's lent itself to being a song approach or a song oriented bass player.
I think so too. And, you know, sometimes they say less is more. And you think about if you like, I know you're a musician, so it's different when we listen to music, because I'll gravitate towards the bass line. I'll go, what's he playing? You know, and as opposed to, like, as you said, you know, when I listen to a Steve Miller track and a Tom Petty, I love those as songs. I don't necessarily dissect them for the bass parts, but man, when you start listening to Chris Squire or even Mars Cowling, who played with Pat Travers, and you go, oh my God, what's going on there? Or Paul McCartney, some of those Paul McCartney bass lines, man, like, and I recently went down the rabbit hole and started listening to a lot of stuff that Carol Kay had done with the Beach Boys and Good Vibrations, you know, that I'm like, wow, what a bass line, you know?
Yeah, she's cool. Your history goes back to the 80s and opening up for Iron Maiden, and that Steve Harris had, you know, basically signed off on his Tech 21 pedal by playing through your rig. And I know that you two have a great relationship, as you mentioned, through tennis. But so you having a Tech 21 pedal of that you ascribe to, did he ever play through the Doug Pinnick? Did you ever get him to do it? Or
no. And as the story went, you know, he said, we're thinking British Lion would love to come to Canada, and, you know, it would be cool if we did it with Coney. It'll be like the old days, you know, 1983 Peace of Mind tour. But, you know, we might need to borrow some. Can we share backline? And, you know, our road crew will help yours. It was almost like a Motown tour. And we love Steve. So we said, dude, whatever you want. You want to use our drums, you want to use our, and he was like, no, I'm going to bring my own bass gear, because it's drastically different from the 810 and the SVT head. And this one particular show where he wanted to try his signature version of it, his gear hadn't arrived in Canada, and he was playing through my SVT stack, and he said, you know, this sounds really good, because I think he uses orange amplifiers with EV speakers, and he's got a crazy high watt head, and
he's got like 12-inch speakers too. I think like he uses a very unconventional bass rig.
Yeah. So I said, well, hey, you know, why don't you plug into the Doug Pinnick pedal? It sounds great. And he's like, don't distract me, mate. I've got to try mine out. Right. So he brought his pedal out, and I think, you know, we had mentioned off air, you and I, that I'm traditionally not a pedal guy. I like maybe a chorus pedal. That's about it. And when I tried that Tech 21 Doug Pinnick pedal, that just was like, my Ampeg rig was on steroids. And that's what I said to Steve, like, you won't believe this, man. It just took it to the next level. So that was so cool that he did a collaboration. You know, I know Getty has done a collaboration with them too. But
no, he said the pedal made your rig sound like his rig. I mean, that was kind of like what sold him on the pedal.
Which, for a touring musician, as you know, if you can fly from here to, you know, Prague and play a gig in Czech Republic or somewhere and just have your pedal and plug it in and you go, there's my sound. That consistency is very important, right?
Yeah. Do you are there any intentions to play live with Envy of None? Do you know what's like? Is there anything on the horizon?
Well, it's certainly been the number one question that's come up since we put this thing out, and it was kind of put together as a project. So we didn't really, much like the other bands or projects we were involved in, you go like, okay, let's record, release the record, tour, rinse and repeat and do it again. But this one we haven't discussed it, and it's kind of like we'll see, because Alex has spent so much time on the road. I don't think he's really that keen on jumping on a tour bus again and slugging it out. And I've done my fair share of shows, but I think honestly, Freddie, if something happened where there was so much excitement, we would entertain a handful of shows, or maybe some festival plays or things like that.
Yeah, cool. Be great to hear some of this stuff live.
I think it would be fun to play it.
It
would be challenging to pull some of it off, but we're not ruling it out, but we're also not planning a big, massive world tour at this point. Somewhere in between.
Yeah, cool. Cool. All right, Andy. I don't, unless there's anything else you want to add, I think we're covered here. I appreciate
Freddie, honestly, it's been really good to come on and nothing like nerding out and talking about bass gear. I love that, and I appreciate it, and we're excited to see what people will think of the record. I jokingly said that we should have a disclaimer on the front that said, "This is not Rush or Coney Hatch." Warning, big warning thing there.
Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you about. A couple of months ago, I saw a press release. You had some artwork that you were promoting.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning that. And if anybody can check out my website, which is andycurranmusic.com, I did a collaboration with the graphic artist who did the debut Coney Hatch record. And what we did was we made some limited edition prints that both of us signed, with all of the proceeds going to the Unison Fund here in Canada. And the Unison Fund is really, it's almost like a dowry that's set up for touring musicians and people in the music industry that don't have any health benefits.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So 100% of the proceeds would go towards that. This wasn't a Curran's going to try to get rich scheme. This was to try to help others.
Yeah,
so
cool.
Anybody that's a Coney Hatch fan and loves that first album artwork, if you go to my website and you can order it there, we've got a limited amount. There are some still left, but everything goes to men and women that are having a tough time, whether it's health-wise or just paying bills or prescriptions or anything that just keeps them going. So it was my one little thing that I could try to do to help others.
Yeah, cool. That's great. I didn't realize it was a benefit of some sort. So it's good to hear that clarification.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Freddie.
Yeah, for sure.
And
maybe we'll even post a link along with this article.
That would be fantastic, man. Yeah. Any help would be appreciated there. The more visibility we have on it, the better.
Cool. All right, Andy Curran, Envy of None.
Thank you, Freddie. Cheers, buddy.
Take care.
Bye-bye.